The main problem was like all these executives on LinkedIn telling creatives how they're going to be out of a job. And it is scary to be very young and hearing that you're going to be replaced by kind of like an alien, right?
The financial primitives built around art require it to be materially tangible. So you can put it behind your $50,000 sofa set in your huge mansion.
We believe in this like balance between the friction and the flow of the creative process.
Welcome back to Humans in the Loop. My guests today are artists, filmmakers, educators, technologists, and founders of Fuser, a company building an AI workspace for creatives. With so much noise around what AI should or shouldn't be used for, and where human creativity starts and ends, I wanted to get Dalena and Hirad on to talk about the creative process in this technological moment. So without further ado, this is Dalena Tran and Hirad Sap. Dalena, Hirad, thanks so much for coming on. Why don't you kick us off, first and foremost, just by introducing yourselves and telling us a little bit about who you are and what it is you're building at Fuser.
Thanks, Seb, for having us. So I'm Dalena. I'm the co-founder of Fuser, and we are an aggregate of AI models, and my background is in film and media arts. And I also have taught at places like UCLA, CalArts, and OSU using creative software, computer graphics, and head it over to you, Hirad.
I'm Hirad. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Fuser. I've been like a creative technologist for a while now. My background is actually in computer science, but throughout the past decade, been doing a lot of work in real-time graphics, 3D animation, short films. Dalena and I are actually partners, so a lot of that work we've been doing together. And excited to be here. Thanks for having us.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on. And yeah, partners in work and life. I'm in deep admiration for you both. That you seem to make both of those things work. Let's go a little bit deeper on specifically, what is Fuser? Who's the target audience, target kind of customer or user of Fuser, and what is it that they are using the product for today?
So Fuser is aggregate of all of these AI models. It actually started because Hirad and I were working, building out technical pipelines at the time for our own music video work, but also for clients. And we were using early machine learning. I think, Hirad, didn't you use like the first GPT-1 for your own
even
portfolio?
Before that, I think we started getting into machine learning when there was this kind of like resurgence of deep learning after the whole AI winter thing. This was early recurrent neural networks and concurrent neural networks. You were getting image outputs that were like 32 pixel by 32 or 64 by 64. So I think this was like very late 2016, early 2017. We were kind of like looking at these ideas. The technology really accelerated quickly, even for that time. So we went from 32 by 32 very quickly to 256. And it got to a point where with a little bit of like massaging, you could actually put it into production.
So we would basically take these experimental outputs and turn them into kind of creative works, but also building out these technical pipelines. You learned how to think about tools in a way similar to like VFX or compositing. They would use node-based kind of systems. And when this latest kind of season of AI kind of kicked off, we were already integrating a lot of these tools and trying to, it was a very practical reason why we built Fuser. It was a lot of subscription fatigue. We would jump between all these different platforms and softwares and trying to run comfy UI on like an older computer, and realizing that it wasn't just like a technical limitation, like your own technical limitation, but it was also like hardware limitation. So, and it was not comfy at all, although we highly respect the tool itself and the community. So we ended up building Fuser as like a browser-based platform that brings all these different AI models together for creative work. So the people that use it are creative professionals. A lot of them
Mhm.
are creative directors, art directors. It's kind of like a visionary software. You ideate in Fuser, and you can also go all the way to, producing media and content. But really, it's a really good place to explore because of its canvas capabilities and because you can see the process and everything. So if you can imagine, I would say that it's similar to something like Zapier, where you can have all these different integrations, and it meets Figma, where you have like creatives and designers kind of using the platform. So it's kind of like this bridge, but for AI.
Mm, mm. So you got the like visual canvas kind of component, like the
Exactly.
Figma style, but rather than having to jump around all of these different AI tools, you're bringing that all together into one workspace where these like, creative folks can kind of interact and work with it.
Yeah, I would
Yeah,
say like
exactly.
we kind of operate like a composition layer on top of all the existing AI providers that are out there, as well as a visualization and interaction layer. And like if we're thinking about like the ideal kind of like target profile, it would be like sitting somewhere in a Venn diagram of creatives that use AI that generate artifacts. We could call the artifacts content. I just want to elevate it a little bit because like
Mm,
content
mm.
has its own connotations too. But we're essentially a multimodal tool. So that means audio, video, text, images. When it comes to text, we support kind of conversational modes of interaction with
Mm-hmm.
LLMs.
Mm.
And as well as using that to augment other modal generation. So for instance, like using an LLM to be like, hey, can you help me with this prompt? Or I'm trying to ideate for creating this poster or building this trailer or advertisement, uh, um, kind of like short video, and taking that output and then passing it forward.
So you mentioned just a few of the different types of artifacts that people might be creating through Fuser. Do you guys have any particular favorites that you've seen or have been spotlighted of stuff that's been created through the product so far?
Yeah, actually, I think one of our users created a drone show for Stranger Things. That was really cool to see the workflow for and the evolution of, because I think it started as early as, I don't know if I'm allowed to talk about that.
Yeah,
But
I
yeah.
don't know.
No, it's out now. I saw the video, it's out
It's
now.
up. Okay.
Yeah. So it was really cool because it's interesting what people actually use it for. Oftentimes it's to do some kind of like large scale installation or visualization that takes a physical component. It could be like a product, like a physical kind of hardware product ideation. But it's because like you can use Fuser very cost effectively to come up with as many ideas and iterations as possible before you move forward to producing some kind of large scale production. And so we've seen it for stage designs, we've seen it for just general pitches to clients being used. But what we're really excited by is these kind of like larger visions that can be somewhat evolved within the platform itself before it actually makes it out. And that's a big part of the creative process that oftentimes people don't get to see. Having been artists, but also designers and also working in film, like there's so many parts to the production process that gets kind of hidden away for this kind of clean output of like a feature length film or even what gets posted on social media. They're all really refined. And what's nice about Fuser is you can actually see where you branch out, where ideas kind of like start and they may end, and you might actually take a different turn and all the iterations that come through. So we want to really double down on that process.
Yeah, I would add also like generally I think AI has made the cost of iteration and prototyping very cheap. So one of the areas that we see Fuser generally used a lot is in the ideation phase for projects that are going to cost a lot in terms of like multi-million-dollar projects. But then at the same time, we see people use Fuser to make posters for raves and warehouse parties.
Yeah.
So it's interesting having this kind of like generalized tool that can cover such a wide spectrum of use cases.
Yeah, that's a very cool spectrum from rave poster to live
Stranger Things. Yeah.
installation and Stranger Things and everything in between. And do you guys see the tool and what you're building as there's like in my mind at least, there's kind of this creative process, ideation, iteration, sort of figuring out, okay, what is this thing I'm trying to create? And then at some point that moves into, I guess, execution. Actually, if it's a film I'm creating or some sort of animation, for example, then obviously I've got to make the thing, I've got to put it together. Are you end to end from idea through to execute the thing, or is it just the idea and sort of prototyping phase?
Yeah, ideally, I'd say we would want to be end to end, but at the same time, as artists and creatives ourselves, we yearn for that kind of like human interaction, human intervention, and like having a direct input in the process. So that's something that we always want to elevate in the product, and in terms of our own philosophy, is that this is not this is just like another tool in your repository of tools, right? The other aspect of the whole end-to-end conversation is generally the capability of existing models, right? So if you are a Etsy mom and pop shop that's trying to generate content for socials, UGC, maybe like very nice product shots, you can definitely use something like Fuser for end-to-end. The standards there are very low, right? But if you're kind of like a studio like Netflix, DreamWorks, or if you have certain requirements when it comes to fidelity, when it comes to the output, this is something that like is restricted at the model level. Like right now, you cannot generate a video that would meet the standards for a theatrical screening, or even online streaming for streaming platforms. So those restrictions are something that will be resolved sooner or later. When that happens, I think when models get to that level of output, I think the conversation about the human intervention becomes even more important. How does the tool center and ground you as the creative in this process, rather than kind of like reducing that entire fulfillment of like creative exploration and creation to just one shot prompting and clicks. And that's not something that we're interested in at all, to be frank. And I think it's partially why we opted for this node based interface, because it makes the process so clear and visible and at the forefront in everything that you do.
Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of people have described this experience, and I'm sure we've all had it to some extent ourselves, of like the kind of 80% phenomenon with AI. It gets you really quickly to kind of pretty close to that thing that you wanted. And then the last 20% can either be sometimes impossible or just infuriatingly difficult and slow and to get to, and you can kind of get stuck in these like iterative loops that feel like they're getting you nowhere. And to your point, I guess there's very different standards, and I imagine the creatives that you're working with are going to be amongst the folks with the kind of highest level of eye for detail, particular kind of attention to those standards. I imagine that they're the hardest to please on that front.
We try our
Yeah.
best.
But I mean, like, I think a lot of people, I mean, at least for me, coming from film and working with students, like having people in the creative process other than yourself is really meaningful to what gets made in general. And we really believe that. I mean, it's like, it's kind of the fun part of making work, is all the different people that bring their own set of like skills and value to a project that make it substantially better than if you were to do it alone or just with AI. I even just think if like you were trying to make a short film and it's, you're just trained on an actress or an actor and the talent is just kind of controlled through these interfaces, you lose a lot of the qualities of what is the art of acting, right? Like of performance. So there's all these different ways to think about creativity, but we highly encourage you to ship it out of Fuser and touch grass and turn it into something actually real.
You both have experience in the art world, you are of that world, and to my understanding, that's just one of those kind of worlds and communities where AI is clearly divisive. I mean, you could argue that there's very few communities where it's not divisive these days, but yeah, it clearly divides opinion about its role and what should be left to the human, and almost like what level of abstraction can we operate at and still call it, a human creation, etc., etc. So, yeah, I guess I'm just curious to get your take on what do you see as the role of AI in the creation of art?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a good question that continues to evolve because actually, when you talk about art and technology, there was always like some frontier technology that people were experimenting with, artists were experimenting with all the time. I think the more recent issue with AI relates to labor, the current kind of socioeconomic issues that are pretty real, and they're not something that I would dismiss at all. Where it fits is, yes, constantly evolving. When it comes to art, I think, there's always the question of how people adopt a new frontier technology. Like VR was really big a few years ago, and I don't know where it fits now, but there are places, in medical industries, like it has a space for it. What we tried to do actually very early on was we had like a kind of creative residency program. And we explicitly told the participants of the first cohort last year in the spring that you guys are all artists. So we invited artists and creatives, designers from like very different industries. So we have game designers, we had like fashion and people who did performance art, people who did like 3D sculpting, illustration, photography, right? And we showed them Fuser and said, see where this kind of fits in your process because you guys work on very different things. You have a different way of working totally in your medium. And if it fits, like, let us know how it does. And if it doesn't, like, we would also love to know that as well. And it's still evolving, like everyone's creative process is different. Like Hirad and I, we make art, maybe not so much lately. We build product right now, but last year I was making art, but for many years we were making art separately and together, and we have very different processes of working.
Yeah.
The way that we even though the outputs might be like a music video, they're very different from each other. How we get to what idea we land on, what kind of visual aesthetic kind of arises from that process is also very different. And each project is different because you're working with other people. So I think like the main thing for us is like to keep things open. I think the main problem was like all these executives on LinkedIn telling creatives how like, they're going to be out of a job. We know this process better than you do because we can replace you because they could generate an image in their style. But I actually think the work that creatives have put in to refining their sensibilities and their taste for things comes in handy moving forward because it takes experience to know what feels good. And it's like a trigger on the pulse, like it's like, do you know how design trends change? How aesthetics manifest not from manufacturing them, but like through material constraints, but also cultural constraints and what people are
The
trying to
cultural
say in that
currents.
moment.
Yeah, exactly. I also think there's a question of kind of like materiality here. like very tangibly. I think this has been ongoing for a long time, like you had the naturalist painters beefing with the emergent photographers that were doing landscape photography, and then you had photographers beefing with people that started using Photoshop and all of that. Or even before that, there was this huge battle between, is DSLR and digital photography really actual photography or not? And there's theses and dissertations and theories around all of this stuff. But I think given the trend towards producing artifacts digitally over the past, let's say, 30 years, if you take that into consideration of the labor that is required there, I think a good chunk of people that are using digital tools to produce these content are actually happy about the emergence of AI to some degree. Personally speaking, from my own experience, I was never excited about retopologizing a 3D model and optimizing it to be able to put it in the game engine. So a lot of like redundant, time consuming, and soul sucking labor has been automated by AI. And what we're seeing within our own network is that a lot of people that are kind of like in the similar vein to us in terms of how they approach their artistic practice are excited by being more efficient and pushing it forward. On the other hand, I think there's also this chokehold on value of artifact that to some degree is institutional, is imposed by the art world to a large degree. I think we saw this also with the emergence of NFTs, and people were saying what is art, what is not art, what is trash, but a good chunk of that revolves around the fact that the financial primitives built around art require it to be materially tangible. So you can put it behind your $50,000 sofa set, in your huge mansion. And like those things are difficult to do with mass generated content. And at the same time, that rate of generation is going to reduce the scarcity of how the market kind of like values everything. So I think there's a lot of different things at play. We have labor, we have traditional ways of looking at art and how it relates to value, materiality. But it's exciting time, and we'll see how it evolves.
Yeah. Of all the people defining what art is and isn't, I'm pretty sure the LinkedIn executives are kind of the worst reference point. I guess what I take from that is, I think what I hear from a lot of people is just when it comes to AI, there's just so much, there's just so much noise. I think so many people are kind of sick of the noise and the people who almost like take themselves out of the, internet doom scroll and are just out in the world doing something that they were previously doing and figuring out, like, whatever it's labeled, AI or not, like, do I have a tool that makes my life easier in producing this thing? Those are often people kind of saying, yeah, you know what, there are actually just tools out there that make my life easier and don't threaten my status necessarily as artist or creator or whatever I choose to call myself. They just take away the bits that I didn't value to begin with. They take away the bit that was just sort of, we all have those things in our jobs, right? The things that are kind of time sucking and don't feel like the place where we can add ourselves or what makes us human, or the things that are unique to us. So, Dalena, do you find that you get any pushback in artistic communities, people who are just almost hear the word AI now and are turned off from the whole thing?
Yeah, I mean, because it's a larger technology other than creative tools. I think AI is like a new market, right? Like I think it has like at least in the US has been the main investment in the last 3 years, 4 years, and it is exhausting to hear about. Also because I can imagine it being very exhausting. You hear about it not just in creative tools, which I have a very different opinion of because I come from a different space of where like I do believe creatives can have more power here, especially if they have the right tools. But then you also have, surveillance, and you have the other kind of ecosystem, which AI also is a part of. I'm always like thinking, why are people so, like, even with NFTs, I'm like, why are people so upset that digital artists can now monetize their work when before they were just doing it for free. Like for me, I never released anything of NFTs of that sort, but like it allowed for a new market of artists to have an audience, and I think that's really valuable. But all these things come with upsides and downsides. I don't hear it personally. Like I don't ever introduce Fuser and people are like, oh, you're doing AI. If anything, like a lot of the people I work with already are professionals to some degree. They're either working in the creative industry and they see it as a tool. And the main people that I've noticed actually that had some kind of reaction are students, much younger people who, again, because they never started working in the creative field, already felt like they were closed off from it when they hear about AI. We luckily never had to deal with that when we were in school. I mean, if you're in the creative field, you're like, well, you're not going to get paid the big bucks, right? You're doing it because you love doing it. That's like very obvious. But I think, it really depends on the economic situation at the time. And I think they all come into play. And it is scary to be very young, not having even freelanced and hearing that the thing you love doing you're gonna be replaced by kind of like an alien, right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, what is this tool? Like, what is this thing that's gonna replace us? So I think it creates a bit of like xenophobic reaction. But I think a big part of Fuser too, other than being a tool, is as educators previously to remind students and younger creatives that you should focus on developing your voice because tools always change. It may be AI now. It could be, I don't know, could be the chips in your
Neuralink.
head.
You just think of AI.
Yeah, Neuralink in 3 years. And not saying that I promote that, but just saying that like tools constantly change and there will always be people at the forefront being critical of them, but also using them productively in their creative practice. And it's a matter of really seeing how it fits for you individually, if it even fits at all, right? And again, it goes back to like everyone works differently. There's no one way to do it. You can automate some things, but we believe in this like balance between the friction and the flow of the creative process. Oftentimes, you need a little bit of friction in order to kind of like stop and think about, in the research process, that's a lot of friction. And it's kind of the most important part. Like if you're automating your mood board, you've lost because that's where you as a human, you're developing your sense of style, you're discerning what you like and what you don't like based off of certain constraints. If you get rid of that, it's just bots creating something and bots consuming it. It's just a cycle that is not related to any kind of human audience at all.
Well, a while back now, I can't remember how long, maybe a year ago or so, I wrote this essay called like A Time for Creative Outsiders. And basically what I was naming in that essay was this idea of, because of the technology of primarily AI, that different skills become valuable in this new economy. Like if we look at the history of tech companies, they have mostly been built by engineers of some description, but and it was kind of engineering skills that almost was like the scarce commodity. And actually it feels like design, creativity, taste, like these things almost feel like they are becoming the scarce commodity. It's not, the barrier is not creating a thing. It's like knowing if it's good and knowing if it will kind of resonate. But also there's something, I think, structurally here that basically to build a tech company, for example, there's been a very well-established kind of playbook, places like Y Combinator, the kind of pinnacle of this playbook. And it's like, right, you go through these stage gates, you prove these things by each stage gate, and then we give you some more money. And basically that money puts more bums in seats so that you can keep the thing growing. And then, some point in the future, you sort of turn the dial from growth to profit. and everyone's happy. Like we live in some like capitalist utopia, like dreams are realized, whatever happens there. I guess my experience of you, however brief, is that you are not necessarily trying to follow that playbook, and you're not necessarily of that world. So I guess I'm just interested to know how you think about like company building here, because you're not a not for profit as far as I'm aware. So you got to make money out of this thing. You got to kind of do the things necessary to make that happen. So yeah, how do you hold this kind of artistic integrity, and like what I can sense in both of you is something you have deep conviction in, whilst also like the pragmatic realities of, hey, we got to build a company that's got to make some money.
I would just say it's not even just artistic integrity; it's generally integrity.
Yeah.
And kind of like maintaining that. A lot of what we try to replicate is inspired by softwares that we love ourselves, right? We love them in one way or another. Maybe some of them for their affordances, like something like Figma. We're not a fan of the subscriptions and how they work, but we love the tool. It's a pleasant thing to work in. Something like Blender, we love it because it's shaped so much of our career, but at the same time, it has shown us what it means to have a vibrant community around a piece of software. Something like Obsidian, because it shows us what it means to have a software that's extensible and flexible. I think we're at a point right now, like where, especially when it comes to software and products, it's the era of post-novelty. Like nothing is there's no idea that's new really anymore. Anything that you look out there, there are 10 different competitors, and we are seeing the kind of differentiators also changing in and of themselves, in the sense that you can look at a company like, what is it, like Cluely, and like that type of distribution model did not exist. Or if 5 years ago, like you went to a VC and you were like, hey, this is my distribution model, I'm just gonna rage bait everyone to get them to use my product, they're gonna be like, get the hell out of this office, go be a serious person and come back. And now it's a completely different era where they're actually looking for that kind of economy of attention built into the product itself. Does it scale long term? I don't know. It's something to kind of like wait and see. But at the end of the day, I think the approach that we want to take is just to maintain that integrity across all the different surfaces that the product touches, from our community to the UI, UX, design, the experience of the software, how it interacts with the outside world, with the outside ecosystem, our pricing model, and how we value our users and how we see them in how we perceive them. And that is that they're not just purely kind of a revenue source for us. I think it's generally for us, it's a long play, like not focused. I mean, we should be, because that's what investors want and that's what markets want. But we're not that. We're banking on 5 years from now, rather than what's going to happen in 3 months, what's going to happen in 6 months. And a lot of our strategy and thinking and how we approach development and building, be it community building, software building, company building, team building, has that kind of like long-term mentality behind it.
And Dalena, I believe you guys raised some money, a good amount of money, not so long ago. So I'm curious just about the role of investors here, because obviously there are many people in the world who set off with some sort of ideology, however loosely or tightly held and believed in by them, and then whatever happens on the way, right? Investors are one way in which these things can kind of either stay very aligned, or it can also knock things quickly off course. So how have you found taking on external investment, and I suppose how do you think about the role that investors play in the story of Fuser?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And I think it leans back into what Hirad was talking about. We actually have really great investors. It was a hard process to get into, the whole fundraising coming from art. You're like, wow, I'm pitching like every day for like 3 months almost. So finding the right investor is very difficult, but once you do, it's really easy. They believe in you like the ones that we have, our lead investor is Collab Currency, and we are really happy with them because they took a chance with us, knowing that we weren't like a Stanford dropout. We didn't go to YC. We had a very different background for why we developed Fuser, but they believe in community building. They believe in the like long-term game of how growth actually works, and it was really only investors that either had a strong sense of understanding community building or creative tooling and software that we really aligned really well. So we finished our pre-seed last year, and now we've been growing the team, and so we're really particular about that, and that makes us very capital efficient. So really, the role of the investor comes in when we really need to grow substantially. So we have some key features coming out that we are hoping will help us kind of sustain a longer term business model for us, that users are going to really appreciate and really like, just based off of our conversations with them. And then we will grow, and basically take off and try to do another round sometime this year.
Culture is like, I think, a big part of it, and cultural alignment and vision alignment. And it just permeates everything from the investors that we find. So like our lead investor, him and his wife, they have their own gallery. They support artists, especially a lot of like digital artists and people that work with kind of like emerging technology. And before kind of getting the term sheet, his team used Fuser for I think 20 hours in 2 days. Yeah. So that was kind of exciting. And they were coming back to us and they're like, hey, we just made this. We think we're gonna do this and that. So that level of cultural alignment and alignment in terms of vision and where you're going is something that we're always seeking, both in terms of people that we want to partner with. Because when you're talking about an investor, you're talking about someone who you're bringing on to become part of the company. They're going to be a long-term partner with you, unless they decide to kind of like exit at some point. And same goes for team building. Like, yes, you could bring on a very cracked engineer that used to work at Salesforce or something, right? But do they understand the creative process? Are they kind of like aligned aesthetically, ambitiously with what you're doing, or are they purely an executioner? And I think this goes back to the conversation that you were bringing on with AI, is that we are past the point of people being sought after purely because they're good at execution. Because what we're seeing is a lot of intellectual work. The execution is being offloaded to LLMs and AI in general. So you're seeking people that are articulate in terms of how they hold themselves, what they align with, their culture, their aesthetic, their style, and how much can they operate in a kind of like managerial, directorial role, and kind of like orchestrating the work. Yeah, just wanted to kind of like add some context to our lovely investors.
It's always nice to hear stories of people who have, great experience with their investors, and an investor who's going to use your product for 20 hours over 2 days, and be rooted in the world that you're operating in. Sounds like a great fit to have found. I always like to spend the last section of these conversations looking ahead in an optimistic fashion and sort of thinking about what is, in your context, what is the future version of the world that you're hoping to see?
I will say my personal vision, when I was really young, I had this like deep belief that everyone could be an artist and that everyone wanted to be an artist. And then, as I got older, I realized that like that wasn't financially very feasible for a lot of people. But I still have that belief in me. And, something that's the difference between a company that like believes you can automate creative labor away versus what we're trying to do at Fuser, which is like trying to augment your creative process, and do not necessarily automate just the tedium, but really add to the abilities that you never had before. So an illustrator all of a sudden can animate without having to rig. They can enter new mediums And I really believe if they're not, you know, in a future where your Fuser is like incredibly successful, is we develop a better context for how we think about the creative process, what gets outputted. But yeah, like the perfect world, everyone can finally become a director instead of just a gaffer. I know so many, we live in LA, we know so many people in production that had these dreams of sharing their vision of a good story to the world, but they didn't have the means to do it. And I do think that if all goes well with the way that we are trying to approach AI, it will allow for a lot more creatives to really enter the space without the means to the traditional means to have done something. And so I really believe that this is a new way to get people thinking about themselves bigger than before. Like you can become a director now, you know, whether it's an art director, creative director, or like a film director, you can start thinking a bit bigger because you can collapse a lot of these pre-production processes down before you move on to something more expensive.
I also see this as part of a kind of like larger trend, you know. It reminds me of the SoundCloud days and Ableton, right? Prior to that, it was like very hard to be a musician, but um, you had a piece of software that made it very viable. You know, there was the emergence of like bedroom producers, right? Which, if you think about it in hindsight, is pretty crazy because like in the 60s and the 70s, you had to go to a studio with all these different instruments and like super expensive racks and analog equipment. Now, a 16-year-old's doing it in their bedroom. And then the other aspect of that is the distribution channel, which is why I was thinking of SoundCloud. And I think we're kind of like operating in in a similar era right now where pre-AI, you had all these distribution channels that were predominantly packed with UGC, and you don't get the same kind of like quality of output as something you would see on kind of like a cinematic experience or experimental animation or things of that nature. Now with AI, you have both the means of production outside of just like recording something with your phone. So the ability to be able to take those ideas, that creativity, and kind of like really externalize it out there for others to see, while simultaneously having access to things like YouTube and TikTok and all of these different distribution channels out there. And I think that's why, to some degree, like all of this stuff is scary for. I mean, I totally recognize and respect that. Like a lot of people see this as scary from an individual perspective when it comes to labor and am I going to be replaced or not. But I think it's also scary at the status quo institutional hegemonic chokehold and gatekeeping that you have over the production and distribution of these artifacts, you know, from film studios to traditional art worlds and superstar galleries and all of that. I think everyone's kind of like grappling with this idea that will this persist long term, like this form of gatekeeping, and it's something to be seen, you know.
Yeah, I think the world in which people are empowered to pursue their creative pursuits, and it breaks down and democratizes some of those kind of gatekept industries. I think that would be a very cool place for us to land. I hope I hope we get there. I will be rooting for you and just curious to see how you guys get on.
Bye.